Welcome back. We're going to now start on the Deuce design challenge. In this challenge, we have to create an app for MicroBit that allows us to track the score of two players and that can deal with the idea of Deuce. In other words, we're looking to keep track of both players' scores and identify a winner. In order to win, you have to both score at least 3 points and you have to win by at least 2 points. So let's get started. Pseudocode is the code that we use where we just write code in English. And all we're doing is trying to make sure that we have sketched out ahead of time, we've planned out what's going to happen in this app. It's important to think about things like what kind of data do we have to store? How much data do we have to store? And then what are the sequence of events that's going to happen as we start to think about the algorithms and the logic that are going to occur in our app? Well, we know for sure we have to keep track of player A's score, and we need to keep track of player B's score. We may need to keep track of more than that, but for now, we'll stop there. Next, we're going to think about the onStart container for our blocks of code. And we use this container anytime that we need to do something one time at the very beginning of our code and never again. Well, as a good practice, anytime we have data types that are numbers, especially if it's something like a score, we want to make sure we set those variables to be a known value. So in this case, we're going to say set player A's score to 0. And of course, we want to do the same thing with player B's score. Let's move on to what should happen when we press button A. Well, since we're creating a score counter, when I press button a few things need to happen in order. First, I want to increase player A's score by 1. In this game, there's no way to score by more than 1 at a time, so we'll increase their score by 1. Then I think it would be a good idea to show the score on the screen. So for now, we'll just say show the score. But as I think about it, we might need to be more specific than that. So let's define what we mean by show the score. We probably want to put something on the LEDs that tells us who scored and then what their new score is. So what we actually want to do is we want to show text or a string. Most of the time, text is considered a string in programming. And the text might just say A equals, just so we have something simple. So now the LEDs would show A equals. And then we're going to need to show the actual number, what the score is. And in this case, we would show the number player that's stored as player A's score. Okay, that feels like a reasonable level of detail, so we can stop there for now. Now, when we think about player B, when the B button is pressed on the MicroBit, we essentially want to do the exact same thing as when player A scores. We're just going to change all the A's to B's. And while we probably could get away with not doing this step in pseudocode, it's still a good practice to make sure you've accounted for all of the functionality you're going to want in your program. Now, finally, we need to think about what's going to happen in forever. Forever is where we're going to be always or forever checking to see who has won the game or has anyone won the game. Now, anytime we're looking to see has a condition been met, in other words, has player A or player B met the conditions necessary to win the game, it's a pretty good indicator we're going to use an if statement. It's a conditional statement. So let's consider what would have to occur for player A to win first. So for player A, we need 2 conditions to be met. So we might say if, what could happen? If player A's score is greater than or equal to 3, and if player A's score is 2 points more than player B score. So those are the 2 things that have to occur, and this is going to be an important connector for us. So we've got if player A's score is greater than or equal to 3, and player A's score is 2 points more than player B's score, then what should happen? Well, what should happen is player A wins. So we're going to make an indicator. We're just going to show this. So we'll show text or string, and that's just going to say A wins. Yay. Okay. How about if player B accomplishes the task? Well, if player B's won, it's going to be the exact same thing as if player A had won. So just like we did earlier with the on button press, we're just going to copy and paste that pseudocode, or we're going to switch the A's and the B's. So now B's score has to be greater than or equal to 3, and B's score has to also be 2 points more than player A's score. If that happens, then we're going to say B wins. So the first thing we said we needed was an on start block. So we'll go to basic. If you don't already have this on your screen, we're going to grab an on start and we'll just pull it up to the top here. And we said in on start, we need a couple of things to happen. We need to set player A's score to 0 and player B's score to 0. But before that, we also said we got to keep track of some stuff. So we have some variables. So let's go ahead and create those variables. We're going to click on variables, make a variable, and let's just type, we'll call this A score. And we'll create another variable called B score. We can call these whatever we want as long as they fit the rules on how we name things. We've got our variables created. So we need to go back to our start. We say we're going to set both scores to 0. So we're going to go into our variables menu and we're going to set the score to 0. I'll zoom in a little here so it's easier to see. We'll change that to A. Then we'll right click and duplicate. We can snap that in there and we're going to set B score to 0 also. The next thing we had in our pseudocode was to consider what happens when player A scores. We need to increase player A's score by 1 when they press button A. And then we need to show the score by showing a text and showing a number. So we're going to first go to input. We're going to grab an on button A pressed. Then we'll go to variables. And we're going to click on change a score. Make sure we switch this, change A score by 1. So looking at our pseudocode, that's what we're doing. We're increasing player A's score by 1. So we'll do that here. Change A score by 1. And now we need to show the score. So in order to show the score, the first thing we want to do is we haven't defined anything yet to show on our screen, on our LEDs. So we probably should clear the screen just to make sure nothing crazy is showing up. So we'll do clear screen. And then we want to show a string. Remember, strings are how we show text, how we deal with text and code. So we had right here, show string, and we said we'd show A equals. So whatever we type in this box is going to show up on the LEDs. So we'll type A equals, and it just thinks it's text. So A equals, and then we need to show, according to our pseudocode, we need to show the number, show number player A score. So we're going to come into basic again, and we're going to look for show number, which is right here at the top. We'll pull this out. And now we could type in a number. If we typed in 0, it would show 0. Or if we typed in 5, it would show 5. But we need this number to change as player A scores. We don't want a constant value. We want a variable value. Unfortunately, we already have a variable. And notice the shape of our variable fits nicely in the attribute window here. So we'll drag it over. We'll get the 2 dots to pop up, knowing it's going to jump inside. And now you'll see that puzzle piece for show number accommodates our variable A score. So at this point, we could test to see what happens on our simulator. So we say on button A pressed, change A score by 1, and then show A equals and A score. So let's press A and see what happens. There's A equals, and we should have a score of 1. We'll press it one more time. A equals, we have a score of 2. We could keep on going. A equals, we have a score of 3. Okay, our button press seems to be working nicely. Now, if you recall in the pseudocode, option B, when B scores, is all the same stuff. We just have to switch the variables. So we can take this whole block of code, right click it for this container, we'll duplicate it, and you'll notice it gets kind of grayed out. So with it grayed out, that's because right now we've already got on button A pressed. We can't have another on button A pressed. As soon as we change this to B, you'll see it reactivates. Now, the only thing that needs to change in here is we got to change all the A's to B's. So we don't want to give A a point when we press B. We want to give it to B. We want to say B equals whenever B scores. And we want to make sure we show B's score. So we can double check that just like we did with A. Pull our simulator back and we'll click B and we see indeed B now has a score of 1. Okay. For our final piece, we need to work on our forever container. So we're going to reference our pseudocode one more time. And we're going to notice we're going to at least have two if statements. And within the if statement, we recognize there are two conditions that have to be met. Player A's score has to be greater than or equal to 3, and player A's score has to be 2 points, at least 2 points more than player B's score in order for player A to win. Once we get that logic down, we can just copy that for player B winning. So first thing we'll do is go to basic. We're going to grab a forever block. We'll pull that out here. I'm just going to scroll over so we can see this a little better. So here's our forever block, and we need to put our first conditional in. So we're going to go to logic. We'll pull in an if statement. And we're going to go back to logic. And before we look at doing comparisons, we're going to add a Boolean comparison. In this case, you'll notice when we drop this in here, this now lets us compare two conditions, and we can compare them with an and or an or. And as the name suggests, and means this condition and this condition both have to be true before we execute any of the code inside of this if then statement. So the first condition that has to be true is a simple condition, is a simple comparison. We are going to be comparing player A's score, so A score, and we said it has to be greater than or equal to 3. We have to score at least 3 points. For the next, we're going to do another comparison. This comparison is going to be a little bit different. We do know we need player A's score, which we can duplicate that block and get into this little folder. But for the other one, we've got to think about how do we know if player A's score is at least 2 points more than player B's score? There's a few ways to get at this. One of the easiest is to use a math block and put it in our container, and then bring in our variable B score. And we need to think about what we should add to B score. Well, we don't want A score to be equal to this. We need it to be greater than this. So if we say greater than, it needs to be greater than B score plus some value. Now, we might want to think too that we actually only have to add 1. Think about the scenario. If B has a score of 1 and A has a score of 2, and then A scores, it would be 3-1, A to B. 3 should win. It's 2 points more than B. So what would we do to check that? We would look to see, is A's score 3 greater than B's score 1 plus 1? Well, 3 is greater than 2. So indeed, that would be true. You could play this out several examples, but it'll always hold. This is an easy way to check for Deuce. Okay, so what happens? Well, we've got our conditions set. So we've met all of we've defined the conditions. Now we just need to show text or string that A wins. So we'll go back into our basic. We're just going to pull out some simple show string block, and we'll type in what we want. The message we want was A wins with an exclamation point. Now, the great news is for B to win, it's all the exact same stuff. So we can duplicate this block, drag it in, and just change all the variables from A score to B score. Anywhere it says A, we're going to switch it to B, and anywhere it says B, we're going to switch it to A, and the logic all still remains. Okay, you can zoom out to see all the code if you'd like. There's a snapshot of it. If you need to copy this, you can pause your screen and do so. And you can always go back into the simulator, of course, and you could refresh it if you need to, although it usually refreshes automatically. And we could test this out. So we have A has a score of 1. B has a score of 1. Let's test our Deuce logic while we're in here. So we'll give B a score of 2. We'll give A a score of 2. A a score of 3. A score of 4. And when A has 4, A wins. Okay, we're going to continue to keep creating these MicroBit and Arduino tutorials. Hope you're enjoying them. Please leave comments down below. Lots of ways to do this stuff. If you've got other insights, other ideas, please, we welcome your feedback. This is for teachers and kids, trying our best to provide some support. So we'd love the community to chime in, help us know where we could improve and how we might do things even better. Thank you.